Welcome to the first episode of No Spin Rodeo. I'm Tommy Joe Lucia, and we're here to talk about rodeo and the Western lifestyle with no BS, no politics, no nothing. Just telling stories and talking rodeo. And in order to do that, we've got our producer, Greg Teagarden, joining us, and the co-host of this show, and probably the most important part of this show, with just as many years of me in the business, with credibility, with grace, the GOAT in storytelling and rodeo journalism, the beautiful, the talented, and my friend, this is Kendra Santos. Kendra, this is your chance. You're kicking us off. Give us what's happening in rodeo news the second week of August in 2023.
Okay, so all the contestants this week started using the term fourth quarter, and they do every year. And so every year, I think it's extra fun to watch, these races. And for me, Stetson Wright's dominating the all around. Well, surprises no one. That's, good for him. But it's really fun for me extra right now to watch. I always call them the bubble boys and girls, the 16th through 20th, 25th. There are still some big hits to be had. There's, Ellensburg and Pendleton and the Tour finale and these things. So it's not going to be set in stone till September 30th. But I step back and I'm like, okay, Keenan Hayes is number one in the bareback riding. How many people know much about Keenan Hayes? Like, what I know about him is that he's a kid and he set the record for earnings on his permit last year. And so, he's fearless, right? And like, I want to know more moving forward. Like, why did you do that? Why he would have made the NFR last year on his permit earnings. Like, that's, pretty cool. Dalton Mask is winning the steer wrestling, winning the world. And it's like, who is he? He's some farm kid from Hermiston, Oregon, is my understanding. But again, I want to know more. So, those are the kind of people that if I want to know and you want to know, everybody wants to know, right? So I'd love to learn more about these people and introduce them, who they really are and where they really came from to appear at the top of the world. So I think a fun one right now, a really fun world race right now is in the breakaway roping and the family ties, which, cowboy connections are endless in our sport. But Haley Williams, who's the daughter of Speed Williams, 8-time world champion team roper, she won Houston, has led the breakaway all year until recently, and she was just knocked off number one by Shelby Boisley, who just this spring married world champion tie-down roper Haven Medjid, and now Haley just bumped her back. So it's a really fun race, and it's especially fun for me because I remember like it was yesterday, December 14th, 2003, Speed Williams is pacing the halls of the Thomas and Mack, waiting for his firstborn, and can hardly stand it that he's not at home because, their first Jennifer's at home in labor and he's dying and he's sitting on the concrete floor. And I would sit with him and then he'd get up and pace like he was in labor and he was just dying that he wasn't home, but he still had to rope one more steer before he could go home. So it's really fun to me 20 years later that baby girl is now, winning it all. It's been fun to watch the whole start to finish. But anyway.
Now, Kendra, have you met her?
Yes.
Is she take after Speed?
She's like the best of Speed and Jennifer, and Jennifer's out there hauling her, and Speed has been out there with their son, Gabe, who's a healing phenom, and enters quite a bit these days with Speed. That's also fun to watch because just the other day he was a little kid falling off of his pony, and now he's a little badass. And Haley is an interesting combination because she's kind of quiet, very thoughtful, but she's definitely daddy's girl, and she has followed every, Gabe's more of a wild card with his personality, and Haley is very serious. And she, Speed has very strong beliefs in the foundation and what's important and the fundamentals. And that girl is a case study. She's she has followed his every word, and it's really fun. She's also riding a horse, Red Light, that was a project. He wasn't supposed to be sound enough to make it, but she wouldn't give up on it. She talked her dad into buying this horse that wouldn't pass a vet check. And they've been through hell and back for this horse. It's like the whole thing is a perfect storm for, this is rodeo family stuff on steroids, because none of it's really supposed to be coming together like this, but it is. And that girl is determined, and it's very fun to watch. But to wrap on the fourth quarter stuff, I mean, we're just stepping into it, but you just don't know what's going to happen next. And, there are blowups and rigs and people, partner swaps and horses going down, and all of a sudden the 6-year-old's in the trailer and had to step up because the number 1 went down, and it's just, it's pretty cool. But the roller coaster of rodeo is real. And my favorite on that here lately was Paid and Bray, which the fairy tale finished up with you in Salt Lake City. But basically I was at Salinas, and a lot of things happened that were off script. He Paid and Bray, he's a NFR team roper who barely missed the NFR last year, and it kind of crushed him. And so he goes to Salinas, which, he's the stud team roper, but he enters the tie down roping, calf roping. He runs the wrong calf. He makes a scorching run. I watch it happen. Like, he's so happy. I'm sitting over in the contestant family section, and all these people are hooping and hollering, and he's very professionally, a lot of class, recognizing the comments. And I watch him ride back, and I realize there's some kind of storm going on at the box. Well, he's run the wrong calf. So it was really cool for me as a rodeo mom to watch how he handled that. I told his mom about it later. It's like he could have kicked and screamed and had a fit, but instead he pulled his hat down tight and ran in there, and the calf he actually drew, no bueno. So that did not go well. But as fate kind of had it and it all played out, he ended up with his team roping earnings by being entered in a second event. He wins the all around, which was as he called it, a bucket list win. Really, really cool. Well, anyway, they take off, their rig takes off, him and his little brother Wyatt bound for, they were supposed to rope at Ogden, Utah the next morning, which they didn't make, but they ended up getting in a bad wreck out in the middle of nowhere on their way. And the horse trailer rolled, and Wyatt's good horse, they lost. And there were 3 other horses and with various injuries, but it was a horrific thing. The trailer was on its side and the horses are in there, and, helpless. It takes forever for people to get there to help, and they cut the horses out, and a very traumatic thing. So they can't get to Ogden, but they get to Days of 47 that night in Salt Lake City and win the gold medal.
Yeah, that's great.
Payton wins the gold medal in the team roping with Brenton Hall. And so if that's not the rodeo roller coaster for you, it's like the highest high, the lowest absolute low, exhaustion, pain, sadness, and then, elation, getting a gold medal.
Yeah. Well, sports athletes, and it was great to see them win, and actually to see the emotion of what they had been through. But, early on when they ran the wrong calf, if you have the ability, and I tell this to people all the time in our business, keep the highs only so high and the lows only so low. Because if you can drive in the middle, you have the most success. And you and I have both seen Ty Murray, Trevor Brazil. You look at the greats, the really greats. They had the ability to kind of keep their mind in the middle. And that's a good example of it. And it's also a good example of, like we always say, pull your boots on, keep going, and winning. And, back to the initial thought, it's interesting to me always in all these years of rodeo, if you look at the leaderboards and the world standings every year, you kind of pull for those that you've seen in the past, but we always see these new names, right? And you wonder, or at least I wonder, what motivated them? Why? What clicked? I remember in Salt Lake when Wyatt Denny came in there and nobody really knew who Wyatt Denny was. He had a good ride in the first round, and all of a sudden you can just see that confidence, right? You can, it seems to me like, and it works, it's with all of us. It's that point when you realize I can win. I actually can win. And that is such a driver. It's a driver in the NFL. It's a driver in all of them. When you think you can do it and you believe you can do it, and if you don't get too low. And, I have a question, though. Maybe Kendra, I don't. But, how much money is there left to be won in Q4? Because if you had a strong one, can you win 50 grand or more
50 grand.
in this quarter?
I feel like that's a pretty big stretch. I mean, to do that, I don't know if that's, mathematically possible, but it depends. I mean, I'm mom to a tie-down roper who has 40 rodeos left if he could get to them, So most of those might pay $1,500, $2,000. There's a few big hits left, but you about have to hit them all. I think 50,000 is not a reasonable number. Yeah. Somebody without fail, right there at the finish line, usually the tour finality, somebody just has, an out of body experience and, 25, 30 grand in one spot because they won every round or something like that. It happens every time, but banking on that,
Well, that's kind of a good lead in. So Kendra and I come from different backgrounds, but we've been in this sport a long, long time. Kendra probably, I would say, sits on the side of the contestants. And I would say I sit on the point of view of both the rodeo fans, the committees, and properties. And so we think that in a lot of our conversations, when we go over these points of view, which we're fixing to jump into, there'll be a unique approach, and we'll get to that later. But the reason that I asked Kendra about the 50,000 is really our point of view for today, which is Sage, right? And it's this 40 event rule that I looked up, and he, the question, what I wanted to look at was that the guys on the, could he get knocked out, right, of where he is? And I think it was about 50,000. And could enough guys win enough money to knock him out of the NFR? And I don't think it's possible. He's having to go and enter rodeos to make a note. It's a side note in the business journal when you look it up, right, that says you have to have 40 events. And so, Kendra, why don't you kind of lay the stage for our point of view today, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, so the basics. This is the second straight year that Sage Kimzey has been directly impacted by this rule. So the rule in layman's terms is that for your Extreme Bulls earnings to count toward the world standings, you have to compete at a minimum of 40 rodeos. So in 2022, Sage also dealt with injuries. He had plenty of money won to qualify for the NFR, but he hadn't been to 40 rodeos. Therefore, the Extreme Bulls money at the finish line was removed from his world standings, and he did not qualify. So here we are this year, and same deal. He broke his collarbone at Cheyenne and had in the last week surgery. There are new screws in his collarbone holding him together. And so here he is. He's got a lot of money won. He hasn't been to nearly enough rodeos. So what he's, I would love to also just preface up front that I purposely did not call Sage about this. I called his peers because I didn't want to put him in a position where I could ever make him look like a crybaby, because I don't think you could beat an excuse out of Sage Kimzey. But his peers had some really great points. One, Sage Kimzey and J.W. Harris are the only two guys that were ever good enough for this to impact this rule. Again, on points of view, we'll talk about it, but I asked his peers, what do you think is the basis for this rule? And so he's like, well, or these other guys, not Sage. The rodeos, they want Sage Kimzey at their rodeo. Well, to cut to the chase, here's what's happening right now. Sage is spending a lot of money showing up at rodeos, paying his fees. He's complying with the rule. He did appeal the rule. He's complying, but he is got one leg on each side of the back side of the chute, and he's got one foot touching the bull, and he's got to have one hand touching the tail of his rope. And they open the gate, and he's staying on the back of the chute. Is this a win? Is this a win for the fans? Is this a win for the rodeos? Is this a win for Sage Kimzey? I guess I'm not really seeing it. Yeah. I understand, perhaps, if we go all the way back, I questioned in the beginning, like why the PRCA would fragment off and have, extreme bulls in the first place, but that's so many administrations ago, let's not beat the dead horse. But here you have shortlist goat person, and he's not thrilling any fans. He's not doing, and by the way, on these rodeos that have limits, he's blocking out the next guy who could actually show up and win some money and do something for the rodeo, by making a good ride or whatever.
I think this was created, again, this is my personal narrative on this. Kendra, I think this rule was created so that, honestly, I think two things are going on here. The PRCA is in the rodeo business, not the bull riding business. Okay. And Extreme Bulls was started off of the tails of the PBR's success. I do think, on that topic, from a show's perspective, a lot of promoters out there in rodeo committees, it's more marketable. And I know you come from a long line of timed event people, but it's very marketable, the rough stock events. That's just the truth, especially for a non-endemic fan. All right. That stuff's cool, which is why you have the Extreme Broncs and the Riggin rallies and the Extreme Bulls. But I think that it was originally probably created because they didn't want a PBR bull rider to come in and dominate, right, in a handful of events and make the NFR. Now, I think that's, again, this has always been my position, and it's not supported by most in the industry. But why wouldn't you want the best? If I were the PBR, I would want a PBR guy at the NFR. If I were a PRCA guy, I would want a PRCA guy at the PBR World Finals. That's the way I see it. Promoting your brand and winning. And so I think it was probably originally created to make sure that some of these PBR guys didn't come swoop in and get to the NFR and knock a guy out. And I understand this, knock a guy out that's went to hundreds of rodeos that year and busted his butt and only went to PRCA rodeos and knocked them out of the finals. Now, here's what I don't understand. And maybe this is too simple and maybe there's a reason. You tell me. But why wouldn't you just have an injury clause in this? I understand the intent of the rule or the subnote or whatever you call it. But why wouldn't you review an injury clause in this case where you have a group of people that review this and say, this guy's won a lot of money. He's one of the best in the business. We're going to give a free pass on this, right, based on the injury. Why couldn't you do that? And here's the problem. As I understand that here's the problem, the losers, and you'll hear me say the losers, and I don't mean that bad, but the guys that can't stay in the top 12 consistently, right? It's those guys that are going to, secretly support this rule because it gives them a shot at the NFR. Really? And is that fair? And do you want the best? There's no doubt Sage he's the GOAT. And then from a fan's perspective and a rodeo committee's perspective, Sage Kimzey and he can't ride, and you tell that story when you buy a ticket to an event, that's a great story, right? But you want to see Sage Kimzey ride. And why would Sage have to take money out of his kid's mouth, right, to go fill this rule? None of it, Kendra, none of it makes sense to me. Now, maybe you can help me understand it. but surely there's a way to give him a free pass on this.
Okay. So for one thing, I was wondering is if you're the rodeo announcer, what you going to do here? What are you going to do? Here's the greatest of all time, but he has no intention of riding this bull. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it really puts everybody in an awkward position. The doctor's release issue is legit. Point taken on, could there be an injury exemption of some sort? So we all know that doctors' releases are, have been grossly taken advantage of. Oh, gee, well, I have a sore groin or whatever. I mean, visible injury, oh gosh.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about he brings a piece of paper up.
If Tandy Freeman in this case can produce the x-ray of the 2 screws he put in this afternoon, surely, maybe the hard part is, where do you draw the line? Where do you deem, because, don't put Tandy Freeman in the position of saying he could or could not ride, right? I mean, where's the line? If a guy has a sprained ankle, can he get on? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but where is... Well, there's 2 things here. One is, if you need to leave the rule in place, that's an option. You could have an exploratory committee of credible people say that this is a reason to get a free pass. But the line there of, the line that we're talking about, that you just have to compete in 40, does that, what about those guys that get on with a sprained ankle, a legitimate sprained ankle, and they lose a spur on that side basically, and they get thrown off a lot because they can't compete, but they're filling the rule out too. And I think the line is, like you said, where's the injury line, right? Where's the injury line? And a lot of times on point of view, we're going to have stuff that we're not claiming. I'm darn sure not claiming that I have a magic bullet to a lot of these issues. And however, here's what I think. What's good for the sport is Sage Kimzey. And the number 18 guy doesn't have the same impact on the sport as Sage Kimzey. And back to what you said, if they're announcing one of my events and come up to me and say, how do you want to handle this? I'm going to say, you tell the truth, right? Say, look, he's abiding by a rule. You're not going to see him ride. He's a world champion. He's the greatest ever. He's healing up. Stay tuned. Have a bit of popcorn while we turn this.
But do we not look like amateur hour? Can you imagine being, at a NFL game and going, well, Joe Bob is going to stick one half of one cleat on the field so we can say he played in this game. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing.
I agree. I think it's ludicrous. I think it's crazy.
I think it's good to go back to the history and the reasoning behind rules, but then to take a deep, hard look and think, every time you make a rule, you need to carry it out to the nth degree and say, does this still hold water? Does this still make sense? Like
I said at the beginning, though, PRCA is a rodeo association. The Extreme Bulls is not top of priority because it's an association that consists of many disciplines and a lot of input, which has always been, without doubt, and anybody that argues this is wrong, has always made it tough, right? It's tough because you gotta make everybody happy in the association. That's a hard pill to swallow. And not always, that's why the NFL has properties and players, right? The players have one set of things that are very, very important to them. Making money and properties and selling sponsors and fans. Those things don't always agree. So what should there be? There should be a negotiation, right? To find out what's best for the sport and what's best for the players, which, by the way, without the players, the athletes, we don't have a sport. 100% agree with that. But without fans in the stands and prize money and sponsors, those athletes don't have anywhere to go. We're back to jackpots and round pins.
Point taken. And also, I am a purist on that. If this is an association for all cowboys, the rule needs to be fair to the 150th ranked bull rider, same as it is to Sage Kimzey. It needs to be fair for everyone. And in this case, another point from the contestant side, from the other bull riders, is on this particular case is Sage got on like 24, 25 bulls at 4 rodeos this winter because of the formats. There were rodeos that between 2 bulls and X bulls and the format of the rodeo, 6 bulls, he got on 8 bulls at one place, like a Houston. Yeah. And so they're saying he got 1 rodeo count, but he got on 8 bulls,
Yeah.
Also, again, stepping it out all the way. Does this make sense? Because we all know, the old, it's not a matter of if, but when and how bad on bull riders getting hurt. And it's like, to get a rodeo count of 1 off of 8 rides. Holy smokes.
That is brilliant. That's brilliant. If they switched it to 40 competitive outs, right? Because every time you ride a bull, it's 1 less bull. Every time you ride a bareback horse, right, it's 1 less that you're going to ride in your career. And that would serve us, if the ultimate goal was to make sure that outside association members don't come in, swoop, and get to the NFR, it does the same thing. So we might have just kind of tripped over something with your comment, with your talks with some of the guys, that maybe that makes 100%. And I would be interested to know. So you're saying he has at least 40. I guarantee you he's got on 40 bulls in PRC events so far, hasn't he? I bet he has.
I can't swear to the count, but they're saying 6 to 8 bulls at some of the winter rodeos, just at one rodeo between that and the X bulls. Yep. So. Yep. Most
of those big rodeos have short goes anyway.
Is a different story. But again, this is something that has only impacted 2 guys since we started Extreme Bulls, and the bull riders said yesterday, look, J.W. Harris one year went from 1st to 14th in the world overnight from this rule. Okay. He wasn't hurt. Yeah. He just made a decision that he didn't want to rodeo that hard. So, but he's still 14th, gets a back number. So,
Well, it's, if you're looking at what's good for the overall sport, I don't think you have a good argument that making Sage spend his money and show up and not compete is good for the overall product of the sport. Nor not taking into account that something freak happens in the buck and shoots and he injures himself worse, which seems to me would be a liability. There's not a simple solution, I don't think, but I do think competitive outs, a dude gets on, nods his head, makes a competitive effort. That might do a little bit to try to do what they originally tried to do, which I really believe has to do with keeping PBR bull riders out of the NFR. And I could be wrong. And I think it probably has to. There's another argument that getting these namesake good competitors to more of these rodeos, because these committees put on rodeos, they donate all their time. They put on these events. They work very, very hard for nothing. That's the truth. And all they want is some bareback riders and bull riders to show up. They know they're going to have timed event guys. And so I understand it from that perspective, encouraging guys to hit more events. But that's why I've always said, and this is a whole nother point of view that we should put on our notes to discuss, and that is, if you went to points instead of dollars, you could up in load stuff, right? You could make it more worth your while to do this and that. So let's say, again, I'm making it up, but if you go to this many circuit rodeos, it's worth a bonus of X amount of points. You could actually probably easier navigate than just on dollar, right? And you could help spread your talent around and help these rodeo committees a little bit.
I will just not let you get out of this without my comment that I absolutely agree. Volunteers make the rodeo world go round. God bless them. A lot of them take their vacation from work to volunteer and donate their time to make the rodeo happen. The only thing, I love the rough stock guys also, and they're awesome for the sport. There's zero doubt about that. But the timed event guys have an exponentially higher financial impact on every town, period.
Agreed. And they spend a lot more money to go down the road.
They go to the steakhouse. They the numbers of them impact rodeo communities exponentially more. And this is not timed events versus rough stock, because we're all in this together and I love them all. But that's also a fact.
Well, and really, there's a large amount of revenue that's brought into the sports simply on the equine care, right? I mean, I am not advocating, nor am I saying that would I pit either one, because I think rodeo is rodeo. It's whole that way. I think the timed events are fantastic. We will have conversations in the future that I think there are things. I'm going to give you an example. Baseball, real quick. Baseball today. If you're a baseball fan, they have fought against putting rules in baseball to make it easier to watch forever because it's been tradition. And they did it this year. And there is a significant difference. I will watch a baseball game because it is so much faster. I do think, and we'll talk about this on future podcasts, we should really look at our disciplines and see the things that will help the overall sport within our discipline, whatever that is. We won't talk about that now, but that's the properties and athletes talking amongst themselves about how to grow the sport, right? And so timed events, I have zero problem with that. It's harder to sell a ticket to a standalone timed event than it is a standalone bareback riding. This is just true. For whatever reason, again, I don't think from a skill level, I mean,
let me cut you off. Unless you're in San Angelo, Texas during Fiesta.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. But there aren't very many purist fans anywhere in the world.
I'm with you.
Like San Angelo,
I think
Texas.
As a sport, we're a very small pond and we best be all sticking together.
Yeah. And here's the deal. The timed event people spend significantly more money to go down the road. However, it is kind of interesting that the lifespan of a timed event, their earning potential physically is probably better. So if you take a bareback rider and you take a healer is probably going to get to compete a lot longer than a bareback rider. So they're investing more into it, just like you said. They have more opportunities to get money out of it, which is probably why it works. That's not the case for a bareback rider. Their window of success on their body is limited.
Brutal.
It just is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's brutal. Greg, just interested. You have any thoughts on this, not having been in this sport for 50 plus years like us? What are your thoughts on this particular issue?
Well, it's interesting because the last night we sat in the production meeting for 10 minutes discussing how we were going to present this situation.
At Caldwell. You're at Caldwell, right?
Yes, in Caldwell. So they had talked about previous rodeos and how the different committees had handled it and how some probably didn't come off very well to fans. So, or what we did last night is we kind of hid it as or we wanted to kind of hide it. So it looked like the bulls just getting turned out, never mentioned it or anything. Actually, it ended up that we just did it after the rodeo because we had a re-ride right at the end. So we wrapped the rodeo and then we did the re-ride and we just let the bull out for Sage at that point. So
that's a good idea. Yeah, you can do it after you close the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They wanted to make sure with the rules that it was okay that they just, didn't even attempt it, but it worked out fine because of the rewrite.
Does this not pound into concrete how stupid this is? Sage Kimzey, it made the trip from Salado, Texas to Caldwell, Idaho to have a bull turned out in slack. I mean,
well, and what was the bull? We haven't even talked about that. Because let me tell you, in the bull riding game today, from a producer standpoint, the right bulls to the right guys. That's how you get rides. And what if he had, there's a million consequences to this that are not positive. All right. Good point of view. Any final thoughts? I think the rule's stupid. I think I see why the rule happens, but it does I agree with you. If you take an outside person looking at this, they really think it's stupid. Now, I think we've dove into a little reasons why, right? That this is in place, but final thoughts for me is maybe they ought to really look at competitive outs as the count and not the rodeos. I think you touched on something that's brilliant there.
Well, and I think, my bottom line is if the guys vying for the gold buckle against Sage are standing up for him and how ridiculous this is played out, we need to go back to the drawing board.
So good conversation. If you have stroke in the game, what might have come out of this is competitive outs. Just think about it. All right, here we go. Now we're going to go to a little part where it's called kind of rodeo on the raw. And here's the thing. If you're like me, you do not miss a Kendra Santos post, right? If you want a story with hard-driven facts that's compelling and emotional, you should go find Kendra Santos if you haven't already. And if you're listening, you probably have, because all of our listeners are going to be Kendra Santos fans. Nobody cares nor really likes Tommy Joe Lucia, and that's okay. But part of the story that she tells, and so what I encourage Kendra to do is a little segment we want to call Rodeo on the Raw, where basically she goes back and kind of gives us an update on some of the things that have happened. If we haven't heard, on someone's family, the tragedies, these kind of things. So, Kendra, how about some Rodeo Raw today?
Happy to do that. And I'll preface this by saying that both of us have access to the people of this sport like no one else. And I do have 3 positive updates, from recent news. But I'll say ahead of time, it's like how these stories come to me. It's really interesting. And last night was a perfect example where I get a random text from a longtime bullfighter. And the subject he would like to talk about with the world is fascinating. My point is, it's a place of privilege where these 3 stories that I will give as cool, follow-ups to the stories, all 3 stories and virtually every other came to me like a Sunday afternoon phone call from somebody's aunt, or, did you hear, or did you know, or would you be willing, and it's like to be trusted with people's, the real deal stories, not just like, oh, so-and-so was just 89 points, it's like this, the real stuff. So this is the good stuff. So the first one I'll mention, there was a really cool reunion last week at NRS in Decatur, Texas. And basically what happened is 20 years ago, there was a world-class goat tire, which we know goat tying after college goes away. But Amy Mott, she's now a married mom with the last name of Dillingham. In 2004, she and her horse Sniper, were killing it in the goat tying, and they were at the college finals, and, cool. So she is a huge goat tying fan. That's her jam. And she was watching this year's college finals, and this horse kind of caught her eye. There's this kind of a stud goat tire right now. Her name's Kaylee Cormier. And, here came this horse, and, this girl from 20 years ago is watching the telecast, and she's like, oh, that horse almost looks like old Sniper, Anyway, she kind of ran it back and was looking at like face markings and brands and stuff. And she's like, could it be, come to find out, friend of a friend of a friend, the rodeo family connected. And sure enough, Kaylee Cormier's Big John it's the same horse as Sniper from 20 years ago. So last week, these 2 girls that are now in different stages of life got together with Sniper, who's now Big John. And I saw the pictures and stuff. It was just really, really cool. Here's this old horse who has gray all over his face, and he got to see his girl who's now, a mom. And it was, super cool. So I love a happy ending. So
hold on, goat tying. Okay. So this is just the random crap that you're going to hear from Tommy Joe, occasionally with good, strong content from Kendra. Every time I watch goat tying, you know what comes to mind? What is going through that goat's mind? How would you like to be one of the 3 pygmy goats in the back pen? I'm in a doctor's out. No, I don't really want to go out there and be tied to a rope and have a horse run at me and then a human jump off of me. I mean, so I'm just saying, all I ever think about when I see goat tying is, oh, goat. Oh, poor goat. Run, goat, run. That's all I got to say. Go on. Just poor
Tommy
goats.
Joe, you're killing me. Do you know that at Poly Royal Rodeo at my alma mater, we now have to have goat tying in the slack only because of protesters? Shut it down.
Well, I don't think the goat is, again, I don't think anything's, again, I'm not saying, oh no, please don't put me in that bucket. I'm not that bucket. I'm just saying, have you ever contemplated what the goat is thinking however they start? You ever?
I've contemplated a lot. My goddaughter, Johnny Jones, the steer wrestler Hall of Famer, his daughter's my goddaughter. And when she was born, from then on, I begged, does she really have to do this? She was an ace, at it. But you're talking to me who had 2 total knee reconstructions, and now I have a titanium knee thanks to goat tying. So,
so the goat wins sometimes. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in my case, high speed, deep sand. It sounded like a shotgun blast, and it impacted the rest of my physical life. But anyway, moving on. Moving on. So, okay. So fast forward. So Cheyenne the other day, I had never heard of a 25-year-old steer wrestler named Ben Kilberg, Iowa. But I get a call. The man in my life, Oatberry, is sitting on top of the chutes with Paul Cleveland, who's like oversees the timed event chutes at Cheyenne. And he says, this kid from Iowa just got hurt really bad. It was, really scary. Well, anyway, he missed a steer and the hazing horse kicked him in the head. And it was like, I've seen the video. It's horrific. He's face down in the dirt, motionless. So the basics is, if you've ever seen the movie Field of Dreams, a breakaway roper who I had never heard of, her name's Dr. Jennifer Rice. She's related to the Franzen family in Rodeo. She's a country doctor, and she's getting ready to rope, and she sees this happen, and she, instead of, telling a bulldogger there, hold my beer, she said, hold my reins, hold my horse. And she runs in there, and, by all accounts that were right there, she really helped save the day. And it was a scary deal. And Ben was intubated and in the ICU in Cheyenne for the better part of a week. Same place where, Lane Frost was taken in 1989. It was a really scary, not breathing on his own, awful. But miraculously, he made his way rather quickly to Craig Hospital outside of Denver for rehab and was not there very long. And he's now back home in Iowa with his wife, Mallory, and baby girl, Elena. And he still has a long way to go, make no mistake. But he could have died right there very easily. And by, bulldoggers aren't really drama queens to exaggerate. And it was bad. And I saw it with my own 2 eyes, and it was awful. So, he's walking, he's talking, and that's, pretty cool. And that this breakaway roper who has to put in for time off 6 months to a year ahead of time, hardly gets to go to any rodeos. It's just, pretty cool that she, happened to be there. So the third one I would mention, there's a young kid, Caleb Berquist, timed event cowboy from Washington. And in March, he had a real bad, rollover on a side-by-side, gathering some cattle on a steep hill, and, was life flighted in a helicopter, the whole bit. And he was paralyzed. But this kid, how hard he's finally back home. I mean, this happened in March, so it was not such a speedy recovery, and his life's changed forever. But it's so inspiring to me to see, and how I got that news. His girlfriend is Murphy Hershey, and her sisters Brooke and Kate went to Cal Poly with my sons Lane and Taylor. So she's the one who's talked to me through this, and the inspiration of, he's finally home. This cool little town greets him. They're all out there, welcome home. And now, he had big dreams and he was on his way. He was very successful, team roper, calf roper. And now it's like I've seen him, Murphy helping him get up into, a swather. And he's thrilled because, it's like you see someone's life dreams and life goals. Like he's thinking NFR and then pivot. There'll be no more running down the rope for you, but the joy that he has to be able to, run the ranch and farm equipment, and just watch, he'll be the guy, like a J.R. Vizane who was, paralyzed NFR bareback rider who's now, working cattle in a special saddle and stuff. And the joy he's getting, he thought, a gold buckle was all that mattered in life. And now he's, he has new goals. But it's really, the perspective that it gives me, and it really makes most problems that everybody thinks is such a big deal so insignificant. And
I just told my son, we were talking about it, and Don and I were talking about it, and someone said, well, we're going to watch our show and go to bed and get up and go to work tomorrow. Well, don't take for granted that you have the ability to go do what you want to do. Whenever I got cancer and got throat cancer and wasn't able to do, it's funny how important those things that you cussed become. Just if I could just do that one more time. And I think our nature is to take for granted what we're all able to do, but I would challenge you in this instance to do the right thing, help people, and don't take for granted what you are able to do in your life. It's just true. And as you get older, you start to see that a little more. When you're young, I think you take it for granted. But you look at JR and what he's doing, and that doesn't mean that every day those guys aren't struggling.
Right.
It's got to be an emotional struggle every day, and to have the fortitude to say, you know what, I'm going to make the best out of this, and I'm going to impact people's lives. Hats off to him.
He's productive, and it's
Absolutely.
just he can help on the ranch and be part of the family ranching multi-generational operation. It's like it could almost always be worse, and so when you start, but it makes the little things, they matter zero.
Amen. Today, what's important to us, so we'll have a lot of unique things in the future, but we wanted to end the show with what we want to call is the why. And it's a darn good question. And that is, why did Kendra Santos and Tommy Joe Lucia decide to do a podcast? And I think I'll start with my why, if that's all right with you, Kendra. I've gotten a lot of calls about doing a podcast with a lot of different people, and I had kind of entertained it. But if you know me, or if you know my history, I don't want to do something unless it's really, really good, which I think I said to you right off the bat. And secondly, I want it to be new and a kind of a different perspective, any kind of production or any task that I take on. And so, I listen to a lot of podcasts in our space, and they're very entertaining, funny stories, lots of history. And I was like, I don't know if I really want to do a podcast. And I was literally driving in my car from the airport home, because I was sitting there and I'm like, if you're going to do this, you need a real partner. You need someone that is great. And Kendra's name just popped into my head, and I hadn't talked to you in ages. And I dialed the cell phone. She's like, what are you doing? And I went, well, what are you doing? Hey, I got a crazy idea. What do you think? And I just want to say that in my career, I have respected Kendra Santos, and I'm not a very good schmoozer, but the truth is, I feel like Kendra and I are kind of brothers and sisters in this game, in that I've watched both of us make decisions in our careers to maintain our credibility and to make sure that what we said we were going to do, we would do, and that we would do the right thing. So I thought that that was a pretty interesting combination, and perspectives are different. Kendra and I's perspectives on a lot of things are different. And listen, if you want good facts and you want good news, Kendra's going to give it to you. I'm going to give you stuff like, what's the goat thinking? And I'm not a gossip guy. I don't like gossip, but I do like debate. I like conversation about topics and looking at all the sides of it. And I think that this platform could be an opportunity for Kendra and I to debate topics, because here's the deal. If the person that you're talking to is stupid, it's not a debate, it's an argument. It's just the way it is. You've been in those situations where, you know, if you're gonna have good conversation, you got to have provoking thought or expertise on either side, and Kendra provides that. And so my why is, the only reason that I'm doing this is because Kendra agreed to do it with me, and it may work, it may not, but we're going to try to do it right, and that's my why. Kendra, what about you?
Well, while we are in some ways really different, to me, we've sat in a lot of production meetings and different things, and we don't always see eye to eye, but we do have a mutual respect to talk through it. We did that the other day before we even started on this, and you took a great deal of time to explain something to me, and okay, you don't always see everybody's perspective. So to me, but what we share, we're both truth tellers. You cannot put a gun to our head or beat a lie out of us. Our integrity is not for sale, and we will not be outworked. And I think those are some common traits that we have. I feel like we both know too much not to try and change the course of history for the better in this rodeo world. And so while I'm pretty sure I've kept more cowboy, secrets or whatever you want to call it, than anyone probably, but you and I both have had access for decades. That's insane. And we share a real passion for progressing the sport. We're not afraid, we have our eyes open to new ideas and thoughts, and yet we can't repeat history when it comes to mistakes. We don't have time. And so absolutely. We need to learn from things that did not work. We know where the bones are buried. We know, why this came to pass, why it didn't work. Sometimes it was simply an ego trip for somebody who's long gone, but we're still here. And so, we need to learn from these things and move forward. And I'll give it feels like we can't afford in today's society to take a step forward and then two back because, we're doing a rerun of, what you and I both remember didn't work in 1993. Like we don't have time to do that. And I feel like as we get older, I was very close to Cotton Rosser. I sat next to Harry Vold for decades in Sean Davis's pre-perf and post-perf meetings at the NFR and had the most glorious conversations about things totally outside the lines with Harry Vold late at night because of course, nerd me and cool Harry, because, it was hard for him to get in that room. We showed up early and we stayed late. And some of the things I learned from those people, they're gone. But let's not forget, it's like Cotton Rosser was the master of the, every performance is a timed event. Well, now Oakberry thinks we should have a freaking shot clock on the timed event guys. Like you get in there and you get out or you're out, that's really surprising. It's just, our access, and that we know now generations of rodeos people and policies and politics and all of it. And it's like, we actually have a chance between the two of us from our very different perspectives to come up with ideas that are maybe better than something ever before. And, it's really hard to please everybody. Maybe it's impossible. But if we continue to try to make the sport better for everyone, make the sport better, everyone will benefit. So if we can keep that pure heart and keep the integrity and keep the politics out and keep the self-serving BS out, we have a lot better chance.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we've seen all of these segments in rodeo history, right? From the early days when I was traveling with Dad and the back of vans and stuff like that. And then, you got a kind of a new where cowboys most cowboys could jump in and do any one of the disciplines. The bulldog and steers were what they fight at the BFO. All those things have changed and we've seen it. And so what you're going to hear here is a little history from us, perspective from us. So Kendra, I don't know what you think of the first time to sit across the computer screen and visit, but what's your gut? Did we suck?
No, I just think that if we just speak from the gut and share what we know, it's the hardest part probably is going to not be to let ourselves be derailed. And about that time, and then about this, because we both on any given subject will go, yeah, and then, because it's countless, the things we've seen and experienced. And so, but I think, bottom line, neither of us needs this, but I'm certain that we can make a difference. And so if we can shoot people straight, I think we've earned the trust of rodeo people because they know we're not going to lie to them. So we will tell it as we know it and as we see it.
We might not tell them what they want to hear.
Correct.
But we're not going to lie to them.
But if the truth hurts, that's on you.
Well, I thank you for joining us today on behalf of Kendra Santos, myself, Tommy Joe Lucia, and our producer, Greg Teagarden. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of No Spin Rodeo. We'll see y'all next time.